committee meeting on the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. First thing we want to do is, committee members, on your desk, the secretary has put on the minutes from our meetings, and I've already read them and signed them, but that's for your. Oh, okay. She has emailed those. She sent them out. That's what I meant to say. So they'll be on your email, and then we need a motion to approve those minutes. Senator Francisco.
Mr. Chair, can we make that motion at the end of the meeting, and some of us have time to read what we should have read before?
I read them, so sure, let's do that then. Okay. Start off with, we have Victoria Potts will give us a preview of the presentation for the department. So welcome to the committee.
Good morning, committee. As usual, I'll be presenting from the white document, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Many of you will remember from last year that the document in front of you contains the budget for the entire Department of Health and Environment, but today this committee will just be reviewing the Division of Environment's part of that budget. So there is a lot of information. I'm happy to follow up if you have a question about health, but odds are I'm not going to know it off the top of my head. So for the Division of Environment, it's all the way at the back of the document on page 37. Just looking at page 37, I would pause to note that looking underneath the box, the division includes the Bureaus of Waste Management, Air, Water, Environmental Remediation, Environmental Field Services, and the Health and Environment Laboratory. And with that, I'll move on to page 39. On page 39, looking underneath the box, the agency estimates Division of Environment revised 2022 expenditures of $159.4 million, including $4.3 million SGF. This is an all-funds increase of $87.6 million, including an SGF increase of $216,000 above the 2022 approved amount. I'll start with that state general fund increase. That is due to the agency's supplemental request for laboratory equipment. The agency is requesting $225,000 state general fund for equipment to test drinking water. The rest of that increase is primarily due to an increase in federal funds, and we'll turn to page 40 to look at that. On page 40 for fiscal year 2022, the agency is estimating increased federal funds for COVID-19 testing. So I noted that the Division of Environment contains the laboratory, and so that lab does all of the COVID-19 testing. So they're anticipating increased federal funds for that. And finally, I would note again on page 40, the fiscal year 2022 revised estimate also includes state water plan fund reappropriations of about $900,000. The governor recommends 2022 Division of Environment expenditures of $201.4 million, including $4.3 million SGF. This is an increase of $42 million, all from COVID-19 pandemic relief federal funds above the agency's 2022 revised estimate. The State Finance Council approved $42 million for COVID testing, but this approval occurred after the agency submitted their budget, so it was not included in the agency's original revised estimate, but the governor included that $42 million in her recommendation. And Mr. Chairman, I'll pause for questions on 2022 before I move on to 2023.
All right, thank you very much. Committee, any questions so far? Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if this is really appropriate or not, but I'm going to ask it. There is a town in southwest Kansas, and I can't remember which one it was, that had uranium in the water. Testing. Would that have anything to do with adding on more water treatment testing, that kind of stuff? Or is this the agency that does test it?
It is, and if that's okay, I think the agency would be better to answer that. They have more detail, but they know exactly what you're talking about, I promise.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Great. I'll do fiscal year 2023 then. So still on page 40, at the bottom of the left side, the agency requests 2023 expenditures of $113.1 million, including $4.2 million SGF. This is an all funds decrease of $46.3 million, including an SGF decrease of $107,000 below the 2022 revised estimate. That decrease is primarily due to decreased receipt of federal funds. So the agency is estimating decreased receipt of federal funds for COVID-19 testing. The agency also has an enhancement request for laboratory equipment in 2023. They're requesting $230,000 state general fund to purchase equipment for metals testing and environmental samples testing. The agency has an enhancement from the State Water Plan Fund for drinking water protection. The agency is requesting $350,000, all from the State Water Plan Fund for the Drinking Water Protection Program. And finally, the agency is requesting $296,000 for the Watershed Restoration and Protection Program. Again, that's from the State Water Plan Fund. And on the bottom of the right side of page 40, the governor recommends 2023 Division of Environment expenditures totaling $178.1 million, including $69.2 million SGF. This is an increase of $65 million state general fund above the agency's request. And that $65 million is to build a new laboratory on Lot 4 of the Capitol Complex. The State Finance Council approved this plan after the agency submitted its budget, and the governor recommended $65 million state general fund to build that laboratory. And Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions on the Division of Environment's budget.
Okay, thank you very much. Committee, any questions for Victoria? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as it relates to the very last paragraph on page 40, the governor recommends 69 million SGF, 65 above the agency's request. And then as you read on down, Senate Bill 159 authorized borrowing money up to 65 million. So the question would be, is this 65 million designed to build this project so there would be no need for borrowing money for the project?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, the bill allowed the agency to bond, but the governor, in her recommendation, decided to appropriate the money, so bonding would not be necessary under her recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to ask you, and if you may or may not be the right person, but because of the passage of 159 last session, would they still, even with this 65 million, have that bonding authority for whatever they decide in the future? Or is it specific only for this new laboratory on Lot 4 of the Capitol Complex?
So Senate Bill 159 authorizes the agency to bond $65 million specifically for the laboratory. So it's not just for any project for the laboratory on Lot 4 of the Capitol Complex. So no, they couldn't just bond $65 million for another project.
So the final question, Mr. Chairman, then would be, so in essence, 159 would be null and void if we appropriate this 65 million for that purpose?
I would say it was unnecessary rather than null and void, but yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on that question, I'm assuming that 65 million included the costs of bonding? And so would there be any savings from not issuing the bonds?
I'm not sure I can answer that, to be honest. I'll look into it. I'm not sure whether the 65 million was the estimated cost of the project or whether that also included bonding costs. So I'll look into that. Yeah.
Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where's the Capitol Complex Lot 4?
It's by the Judicial Center, so Southwest Topeka on the other side of the Judicial Center.
Any other questions, committee, for Victoria? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Victoria, would that $65 million qualify for some of this ARPA funding?
Thank you for the question. So right now, the Department of Administration is anticipating perhaps half of the project could be covered by ARPA funding, but there's no guarantee at this point that it would be. So that's why the understanding is why the governor went ahead and issued the SGF. So because the Department of Administration is only estimating, they don't have confirmation that it would qualify.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, committee? Not, thank you very much, Victoria. Next, we'll call upon Janet Stanek, Secretary of the Department of Health and Environment. Welcome to the committee, Janet.
Thank you. I've met some of you, so good to see you again. I'm just here to really introduce myself. I'm in week 10 of my new job. I was at the State Employee Health Plan for 15 months ahead of that, prior to that at Stormont Vale in the healthcare arena. I don't have a lot to say because the experts are here to present, but I would say that, as you know, KDHE is made up of 3 important divisions: Medicaid, Public Health, and Environment, and they all intersect in some way in protecting, and providing a safe and healthy environment for Kansas remains our mission. I have enjoyed the time I've spent so far with the Division of Environment and got to learn on a fast track a lot of what they do, and am just in awe of it. And we just want to say thank you for your support in our mission of, clean air, clean water, clean soil for our citizens. I will be glad to answer any questions that you have. I think we can follow up on some of the questions that were just asked about the budget and the lab project with the people that are here from our team. But otherwise, I just want to tell you I'm really enjoying the job, and thanks for your support and all that you do for the state.
Thank you. Any questions for Secretary? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would it be possible if, and I'm just thinking out loud here on this $65 million, that we wait until next year to see what ARPA does and then consider this? What kind of conditions the building in that we're in right now, what would 1 year do? That's my question.
Well, I'll just say, I'll answer the part about the condition the building's in. I toured the lab. It's amazing. It's the old hospital on Forbes Field, the old military hospital, and there's a lot crammed in there, and it's pretty antiquated. And so, especially in light of what we've gone through over the last 2 years, making do with cramming staff in there, not having a lot of workflow opportunity to get more efficient and effective and throughput. And I have a history of running, having oversight of the lab in a hospital world. And so it's so important to have that new technology and be able to do all of that. So I'd say we're very limited in that. I can't speak to, so I guess limping along isn't really anything we've thought about because we've been on this track to get the new lab. I don't know what the conditions of the financials are. I'd ask our Chief Financial Officer if he has any input on that. Dan? Dan Timish. Thank you.
Yes, Dan Timish, Chief Fiscal Officer, KDHE. Agencies in the state typically don't finance, construct, and own buildings. That is handled by Department of Administration. And I think the best thing I can do with your questions specific to the $65 million and ARPA would be to refer those questions to Division of Budget and Department of Administration. Now, I will say that the agency is working on an ARPA investment ideas log, which goes to the Recovery Office, and that the $65 million for that building is on our list. So it won't be lost sight of with regards to any request to the State Finance Council, Sparks Committee on ARPA dollars. But it's also been put in our budget, And the financing mechanisms will not happen within KDHE. That will happen over at the D of A. So the best thing I could do is refer you to them to go directly to the source.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much. Did you have another one? Okay. Senator Pack. Well, yeah, Senator McGinn was next.
Thank you. I would just suggest you tour the facility. And for somebody that's had their budget for a decade or more, we've talked about this for years and years and years. And after COVID hit, it really pronounced the fact that we need a new updated lab for them to work in for future challenges that we have. And I know ARPA has been talking about trying to use that money for at least a year. That conversation's been going on. So I think what we're saying here, we hope we can use the ARPA money, but no matter what, we have an inadequate lab for our state, and we need to move forward. It's gone through the State Building Committee. It's gone through Ways and Means. We've talked about this for a long time, and I just think it's time we move forward.
Senator Pack, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Projects such as this takes a lot of planning, and as we just heard, it's been going on for several years. The current facility, and I don't know who to ask this of, Mr. Chairman, but the current facility that houses the laboratory, what would become of that building? Is it not ours? Is the department just renting or leasing? Would it become is it a state-owned property by the Department of Administration? Can someone just sort of walk the committee through briefly so we can make a better informed decision as to what we might have as terms of assets?
Yes, I'm going to have Leo Henning, our Deputy Secretary of Environment, speak to that.
Good morning, committee. Leo Henning, Deputy Secretary and Director of Environment at KDHE. The building is owned by the state, and the Department of Administration is in charge of it. From my understanding is the building will be demolished. That the upkeep, and I believe they will try to sell it. They don't think that there's going to be much interest in it, and that ultimately it will be demolished. But that's what I understand. If Department of Administration would be the perfect person to ask that of, but in our discussions, that is what I understand.
Thank you, Leo. Any other questions? Madam Secretary, you was up. Does anybody have any questions for Janet? I think we're done. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. So next up, Leo, we're back right again, so welcome back.
All right. I need the clicker. All right. Again, good morning. So I have a PowerPoint presentation, and I think you have the slides in front of you. Secretary Stanek discussed the first couple, so I'm going to go to this slide here, which I believe is number 4. And so I'm just going to give a quick overview of KDHE's bureaus so that we can refresh everyone's memories as to what KDHE Environment does. Basically, KDHE Environment is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for the state. We implement probably 90 to 95% of the federal requirements in the state. Here's a listing of the federal acts in which we implement. The first one is the Clean Water Act, which governs surface water quality and discharges to streams. The Safe Drinking Water Act, which is the act that governs our public drinking water systems. The next one is the Superfund Act, which is the program that shows us how to clean up sites around the state. The Resource Conservation Recovery Act governs solid and hazardous waste use and disposal in our state. The Surface Mining Reclamation Act is a Department of Interior Act, which governs surface mining and reclamation of surface mining areas, mostly down in southeast Kansas. And then the last one on the list is the Clean Air Act, which governs air quality standards and emissions into the air. So you can see all these federal acts are 40 to 60 years old. They have been around for many, many years, and so most of the industries in the state understand and know these requirements very well. Uh-oh, that is not the right slide. I'm going to pass that slide up. Here is a overview of the Division of Environment's 6 bureaus. Under each bureau, you can see the different programs that are listed that each bureau implements. It's a nice little cheat sheet. If you guys would ever get a call from a constituent, this would be something that you might want to have on hand to help direct them to the correct bureau if you get a call. So I'm going to talk about a little bit more about the different bureaus. Bureau of Air, again, as it states, is the air permitting program. It governs air emissions and air quality. The asbestos program, which is a certificate program for contractors that to ensure that proper handling and disposal of asbestos is completed. And then the lead programs for homes is the same idea, where it is a contractor certification program for contractors that do lead abatement in homes. The next bureau is the Bureau of Environmental Remediation. It is where we house most of our cleanup and redevelopment programs. The cleanup programs that you're probably most familiar with are the underground storage tank program, which deals with gasoline stations around the state. And the other ones are Superfund and then several of our state cleanup programs, like the voluntary cleanup program, the orphan sites program, dry cleaning program. So those are all specific programs that deal with a specific subset of contaminated sites. Our redevelopment programs, which help blighted properties become redeveloped and used get them back on the tax roll. And then the surface mining restoration is what I talked about earlier, which is they deal with mine safety, shaft subsidence issues, acid mine drainage down in the coal mining areas in southeast Kansas. Next bureau is the Bureau of Waste Management. They handle all the solid and hazardous waste sites in the state. Everything from landfills to TSDs. They also promote composting, recycling, household hazardous waste programs, and they also have the tire program. Bureau of Environmental Field Services houses the 6 district offices that we have around the state. It also, in those 6 district offices, are the inspectors for the programs here in Topeka. They also are our eyes and ears out there in the state. They're who your constituents probably talk to first around the state. They are the first people on the ground when there's a spill or we receive a complaint, or if there's a disaster, helping locals deal with the debris. They also have the livestock waste management section, which is the section that regulates the feedlots in the state. The Watershed Restoration and Protection Strategy Program, which is the RAPS program. They deal with the non-point source pollution, which is typically sediment, fertilizer, bacteria that are run off agricultural fields and impact our surface waters. And then the last one is the Drinking Water Protection Program, which is a program that helps small municipalities to ensure that their drinking water meets federal standards. We have many, many cities around the state where we see that their drinking water concentrations for basically nitrates is incrementally increasing over time. And so this program works with those small communities to see if there's a way that we can put something on the ground in the area to reduce those nitrates to where they don't go over the standard. Because once they go over that standard, then those small municipalities have to treat that water, and that water and those treatment systems are very expensive. So we're trying to do something preemptive so that we don't have to put on a treatment system. Bureau of Water, it deals with wastewater treatment systems that discharge the surface water. They also deal with the safe drinking water. They also set the surface water quality standards for the state, and they run the state revolving loan program, which is a low-interest loan program for municipalities to upgrade their infrastructure related to drinking water and wastewater treatment. Last is, of the 6 bureaus, is the Bureau of Health and Environmental Laboratories. The laboratory does environmental sampling for us, for the programs. They also do most of the drinking water samples for the drinking water supplies around the state. I believe they do 95 to 99% of the drinking water samples from the state. They also perform the health testing, things like newborn screening, influenza, sexually transmitted disease investigation work, tuberculosis, and now COVID. The last one is the breath alcohol program. That is a certification program that certifies that the breath alcohol testing equipment that's used by law enforcement is completed and maintained in a manner that whatever results come out of those instruments, it can be used in a court of law. Then the last one on here is the lab certification programs. We have staff that go out to all the labs, both health and environmental labs, to verify that they are following quality assurance protocols so that we have reason to believe that the results that we receive are reliable results. So I wanted to put this, oh, I'm missing another slide. Okay, I'll come back to that one. I am sorry, but I am missing some slides and I don't see them. So I'm just going to, talk, and you won't be able to see it, I'm sorry. But I had a slide there which shows our normal funding for our environment division. Normally we have about a $70 million budget. About $4 million of SGF. Trust funds is about 26 million, federal is about 18 million, and then fee funds is about 19 million. And then state water plan is usually in the 3 to 4 million. Is it? No, that's not it. So anyway, but what I wanted to express is that this is our normal budget, is about a $70 million budget. This has not been a normal year because of the COVID testing. We have performed at the lab since COVID testing began about 450,000 COVID testing samples. And so that cost is not reflected in our normal budgets. So you're going to hear me talk about my normal budgets, my normal head counts, but that's pre-COVID type numbers. So I'm sorry that it's not up there. So let's go to this slide here. So as I mentioned, normally our federal dollars that we receive is about 18 million. As you can see right now, we're showing 146 million. So there's been an additional $128 million come to the Division of Environment for the lab to perform COVID testing in the state. With that 128 million, we have had to purchase additional instruments and support equipment at the lab. We've had to buy testing supplies, personal protective equipment, reagents, things like this to run those samples at the lab. We've had to add additional staff. We've also had to pay for all the expenses related to the mass testing areas around the state. Also, with the equipment and testing supplies for the health departments, the schools, the clinics. All that was run through our budget out to and paid for by our group for those expenses. We also paid for all the private labs, like a Wichita State that was doing mass testing in Wichita area. All the costs was paid for out of these funds. So that's where the $128 million additional in our budget for this year is. So the next slide kind of reflects that additional cost. The contractual services, which you can see is over 50% of our budget now, is an additional $78 million of contractual services, all related to paying for private labs for the COVID testing. Again, our normal contractual is around $26 million a year, and that is for the environmental studies we do. So you can see much of the money of the additional COVID money went to contractual services, but on the commodities piece, which is the upper on the right-hand side, our commodities is usually about $3.2 million, and right now there's an additional $46 million there, and that's buying those supplies, those test kits, those reagents, and things like that to get those out to the secondary laboratories around the state, or partner laboratories. And then there were slight increases in salaries for the additional staff that we brought in, about an additional $3 million in salary there. So that's 22. So for fiscal year 23, which is next year, right? There's placeholders here for additional federal dollars. I have no idea what the COVID requirements will be for 23 after July of this year. There are, like I said, there are placeholders there for an additional $41 million of federal funds. I hope we don't need it, but it will. There is some money there if we do need to continue COVID testing into next year. And also, you'll notice another large line item there is the state general fund, which is usually a $4 million funding at source, is now $69 million. And that is the $65 million additional that was put there for the laboratory that we were talking about earlier. So that is showing up in our 23 budget as $65 million for the lab. So here's our expenses, our estimated expenses for 23. Again, there's an additional $20 million in commodities there for testing supplies, and there's another $18 million there for contractual services, again for COVID contractual work. You'll see on the upper right-hand corner there is a $65 million expenditure for the laboratory again, and then we did maintain a $3 million there for staff out at the lab for additional testing if needed. So here's just a running graph showing our funding history over time. You can see that most of it is pretty flat, and I will say that these curves do not have any COVID dollars in them, so this kind of returns us back to our normal budgets. And trust fund expenditures have gone up recently, dealing with orphan sites and underground storage tanks. But the federal and our fees have remained fairly flat. State water plan has increased a little bit recently. And then the state general fund has been flat for several years. So the next slide is just a breakdown of the state general fund. You can see that historically we've had received almost $10 million, and currently we are at that $4 million spot. All right, so let's go to the supplemental and enhancement requests that were in the governor's budget. There's a $225,000 supplement there for replacing equipment. I do want to remind this committee that last year this committee did add $120,000 of state general fund to our budget to purchase the equipment with. And this year, the governor has included that as a supplement for this year of an additional $225,000. In '23, she has continued that funding for laboratory equipment at a rate of $230,000. And then the governor has recommended that we fully fund the state water plan this year. Those two items on the bottom of 23, the drinking water protection for $350,000 and the watershed restoration protection strategy for $269,000 will happen if the state water plan is fully funded by the legislature. If it is not funded, then we would not receive those additions there. So again, I hope that this committee will support the governor's recommendations on this. We do need the equipment. We can put that money to good use for the drinking water protection and watershed or RAPS program. And so I hope that the committee will support her budget on those two initiatives. So something that I wanted to talk to a little bit, because I know I've been having questions about it, is the federal infrastructure money that is coming down. Also known as the bipartisan infrastructure deal or bid. Right now, the Bureau of Water is targeted to receive an additional $79.4 million from EPA. And those monies would go $37 million to the state revolving program for loans, $32 million for lead line replacements for our municipalities that are trying to comply with the new lead and copper rule, and then an additional $9.6 million for the cities to look at emerging contaminants. And this is mostly centered around the perfluorinated compounds, which is what we've heard about in the news is PFOA and PFOS. So if this is fully funded by Congress over the next 5 years, there's an estimated that Kansas would receive an additional $459 million from the federal government to implement these programs. The first funding, the $79 million that I have noted there, we think we will start seeing in the next 30 to 60 days. We just had a conference call with EPA Region 7 yesterday, and it seems like every time we have a conference call, it slips about 30 days. So, but we are anxious to get that money in the state. We have many municipalities that will be able to take advantage of this, and we're excited to have it. Also, with the money comes rules on how to spend that money. Hopefully the rules will come at about the same time as the money does, because we hate to have money and not know how to spend it. So we are pushing on both fronts to get the money here and get the rules of engagement out. One other area that we have seen a significant increase from our federal partners is the Bureau of Environmental Field, Environmental Remediation, the surface mining folks down in southeast Kansas. We have fairly good information or confidence that we will receive an additional $4.7 million a year to deal with the coal mining issues down in southeast Kansas. Our normal budget is about $2.8 million a year. They're estimating an additional $4.7 million a year for the next 15 years. So our budget would go to $7.5 million to deal with those issues. Again, these have to be approved by Congress. Congress has changed minds and directions from time to time. So this is what we think will happen in the next year or two, but anything past a couple years, and I really cannot speak to that. All right, so some accomplishments. In 2021, KDHE helped Wichita attain a $547 million loan between the EPA and KDHE to build their new drinking water plant in northwest Wichita. Since 2019, KDHE SRF has provided $22 million to communities less than 1,000 population. 13 of those communities will received a almost $8 million loan forgiveness on those loans, so that they have a better chance of implementing those programs and saving the taxpayers and ratepayers in their cities. We've provided $1.7 million to school districts to replace aging diesel school buses. We provided $2 million to the Department of Transportation to build more electrical charging stations around the state along our highway systems. And we were given authority to build the lab. I'm going to talk a little bit about our challenges. Our number one challenge is employee recruitment and retention. And I will talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. When I was in the House, they asked me to provide certain information, so I will brief you on the information that they requested. New program funding. There's a whole bunch of money that I just talked about coming from the federal government that's going to have to go out to all of our municipalities. We are not increasing our staff to do that. So it's going to it is going to be challenging for our staff to keep up with this additional funding coming in. And then our last challenge is the drinking water compliance for our small communities. The smaller the community, the harder it is to keep up with the new rules and regulations and requirements for drinking water systems. They do not have the population base to spread those costs over. So it is very difficult and challenging for those smaller communities. So recruitment and retention. It didn't go. There it is. So again, employee recruitment and retention is difficult. We have a hard time hiring geologists, engineers, chemists, biologists. What I see is that our entrance pay, entry level, for someone that just recently graduated, we can hire them, but we can't keep them. So I'm going to go to this next graph. So this is the employees that I currently have at KDHE. It doesn't include vacancies and things like this. It just shows that the tenure of my staff is mostly people that have been with the state from 1 to 5 years. And that is what we see, is that 60 to 70% of our new hires leave within the first 5 years. So we're able to hire them out of college, they receive some education and experience, and then we lose them. And so we are constantly always backfilling and hiring some of the positions that we can. The other ones, we can't even attract into the state at our current salary rate. So that is it in a nutshell. We can get people in for a short time, but we can't retain them. We are not competitive. So with that being said, I hope that this committee would support the 5% pay increase for the state employees that the governor has in her budget. That will help. It won't fix the problem, but will help. Every year that a pay increase does not go through for the state employees, it's just another group of employees that are leaving. Next one is I would recommend a market survey for these professional staff to see where we are in comparison to private industry and other states. Because out of the people that leave, probably over half of them state the reason for leaving is not that they don't like their job. It's because of better opportunities outside of the state. So with that being said, it concludes my presentation, and I will stand for any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Leo, we both know what happened with the Arkansas and the nutrients that are coming in and what happened at Lake and small town had to put in a $6 million water treatment program. Do they get a, they bonded it. Is there a way that we can make it so their interest is extremely low? I mean, it was no fault of theirs, it was Colorado.
All right. We provide them a low-interest loan through the SRF program. I believe that loan was probably in that 1.4% because they are low-interest loans. The state's not trying to make money on this. We're just trying to take care of our costs with this. It is unfortunate. I totally agree. I wish that I had a way of fixing that. We are going to have conversations with Colorado. Legally, it's going to be hard to do much because it's a non-point source. It's naturally occurring. And so there's not a person or an entity to say you're at fault here. And so it is pretty much falls outside of the Clean Water Act laws that we can use to do anything about the uranium that's coming across the state line. And I know that it is an issue in the area. I know that other cities, I know that the private drinking water well owners in the area have been impacted also. It wasn't just the folks in town. KDHE went out and sampled all the homeowners that had private wells in the area to let them know what was in their water wells. They are not regulated. Private water wells are not regulated by the state. So we provided the information to the homeowner, and then they have to make decisions on how do they want to continue drinking that water? Do they want to put in a treatment system on their house to take the contaminants out? Do they want to use bottled water instead of the groundwater for drinking? But it's up to those private landowners or homeowners to decide how they want to deal with the contamination in the water. And again, I fully understand it was not their fault that this happened, and I really wish I could do something about it, but I can't. And I would say that there will be a study that was being completed by the Kansas Geological Survey, and that study should be out sometime this calendar year, which will document the current condition of the contamination in that area.
I think at this point, we'll stop the questions. We have one more conferee to visit, so we can get the rest of them if we have some more questions later. So, Committee, Aaron Popelka from Kansas Livestock Association, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to address a very small piece of the Division Environment budget, but important to us. I think the issue we have, and I think Leo touched on it, has to do a little bit with employee retention, but it deals with the livestock waste management system. So just a little background and history. Any confined feeding facility over 300 head has to register with the department. If those smaller facilities have the pollution potential, they have to get a permit. Once you hit 1,000 head of beef cattle, you're required to get a permit. If you expand an existing permitted feed yard, you have to do a permit application, and renewals are every 5 years. Those applications take review of an actual engineer. They can't be done by anyone other than an engineer, the way the department's rules, regs work. So if you go back to last year, remember we came before the committee and the Appropriations Committee, and the legislature helped us out. Last year, we were in a little different fiscal circumstances, short on money, and the governor proposed a 10% shrinkage. As part of that, the Division of Environments proposed to reduce the amount of engineers in livestock waste management. We had a concern with that, saying, if you do that, you're going to cause these permit applications and renewals to back up. And so attached to my written testimony, you'll find attachment A. That's the language that you all approved in House Bill 2007. It just said you can't reduce your engineering levels below fiscal year 21 levels. And if you run short on money, you need to go and reduce staffing levels and technicians, specialists, and inspectors, because those folks don't have the qualifications to sign off on these permits and renewals. So that's current law. we were hoping, when the governor came out with her budget, that they would address this situation, because one of the things, I think, out of anybody's control, and that goes to Leo's issue with retention, their lead engineer resigned to take another job. So even though the bill requires them to maintain engineering, they now by default have an opening. And when that engineer resigned, it started to back up permit applications. And I don't know exact backlog. Leo could probably give you more exact numbers. They've worked hard with a contractor to kind of reduce those, but they haven't been able to fill that position yet. So solutions, I don't like to come here with just one. I like to give you guys options. There's really two options to fix the situation. One would be to add some money to the budget. And our folks tend to be fiscally conservative, so I wanted to give you another option we'll get to in a minute. But one option would be to fill it. Currently, if you go on the Kansas hiring website, the KDHE has that listed because they are required by the appropriations bill to fill that. And they have it listed as $54,891 for a trainee, $57,000 for an associate, and almost $72,000 for a professional. Now, I did some cursory research and looked at K-State Engineering, and they basically say that a starting engineer might make $58,000, and a PE, which requires some training before you can get that certification, $92,000. So right there shows you the department, not through their fault, they can't pay enough to get those engineers. So one option would be to put some more money in the budget. The other would be to continue the proviso, and attachment B on the back side of my testimony essentially takes the same proviso from last year and just updates it for this year, saying you have to retain the level of engineers in livestock waste management at that 21 level. I'm sure the department probably has some preferences to which one of my options, but I wanted to come with an option. We'd be happy with either of these, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We just wanted to raise that issue for you as you work the bill. So happy to stand for any questions. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I feel like I do need to respond a little bit to what was brought up here, and I'll make this very quick. We have had that position to recruit that engineer posted for months, but we cannot get applicants. So even if I cut additional staff, if I can't pay that person more money, I can't recruit anybody. So, and the underbelly of this is that the Department of Administration will not allow us to pay an engineer more than what the going rate for engineers in the state is. Because how do you justify paying an engineer in one spot more and an engineer in KDOT less when they're both professional engineers? So it's an administrative issue, and that's why I suggested a market survey in my discussion may be the solution to this. But if I have nobody that applies for a position, I can't hire them, right? So that's the concern. Right, I can't replace them. If it is, like I said, I've had that position open for months with no applicants.
Okay, all right. Senator Strawbeck's question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for you, Leo, if you don't mind standing for a second. So you said that the person who left had a better offer, I assume. Was it simply salary as to why they left?
Yeah.
Or is that your impression?
Yeah, he enjoyed his work, but, you know, the going rate for a professional engineer is much more than what we can pay. And it was a very lucrative offer that they made him. So I can't blame him for not taking it, but we just can't compete in the open market. It's the problem.
Right. With staffing shortages in every industry and qualified laborers, very difficult to find. You said you've had this posted for months. Have you worked directly with Kansas State University to recruit a current student, possibly?
We go to the job fairs to talk to the graduating students. We go and offer internships to try to bring them in early. And the two of the engineers that we have came into that program via that direction. They came right out of school, went right into there, and they're staying, but they've been here for about 2 years. So once they get their PE license, they'll be highly marketable again. And it's that first graph that I showed you. Once they get the experience, they're highly marketable, and there's no need to stay here because they can get better offers outside.
Okay, thank you.
Committee, we're about out of time anyway, so Senator Pack, you have one more question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief. I've got several, but I will just ask one. In the slide presentation, Deputy Secretary Henning, you mentioned that last session the legislature approved $120,000 to purchase new equipment for the lab, and then there's a request for $225,000 additional in fiscal year 22, and then another $230,000 in 23, for a total of $675,000. Substantial amount of money. We're talking about a new lab. This equipment that would be purchased, could it be, should it be, is the plan to move it to the new facility?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's the only question I'll ask, Mr. Chairman, at this time. Thank you.
Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick motion on the minutes, if we have time for that.
We will make time.
Okay. I move that we approve the minutes from January 13th, 20th, 25th, and 26th. I do have two changes for the ones on the 27th, so if we could do that tomorrow, everyone could see that wording. So those for 13th, 20th, 25th, and 26th.
You heard the motion. Is there a second? Seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Minutes are approved. Thank you very much, and we will do 27 tomorrow.